Hey guys, welcome back to another Q and A. It is July 23rd, 2020, and this week was another open Q and A. So let's see. Let's get into these questions, and we'll get a YouTube video going. All right. Lifestyle question. How would you tell your significant other to start going to the gym without sounding like a douche? LOL. And perhaps mentioning going out to eat less and have it be once a week rather than every other day. How would you approach this talk? Oh, that is a tough one. You know, actually, on the Mind Body broadcast, we had done an entire episode on relationships. I know the person asking this listens to all those, so I'm sure they've heard it. But for anyone else, we did do an entire episode on relationships within the fitness industry. It's an interesting topic because, just in like a broad sense, you know, I've had so many, especially Gen Pop clients over the years that have lost a lot of weight, or they've, you know, really drastically changed their appearance and their lifestyle and just how they live their everyday life, because it would be a little more regimented in terms of just everything, right? They're managing their stress and getting up and going to bed and being more regimented and prepping food and eating a certain way. Not that they're not doing any social gatherings or anything, but there's just certain differences in their life, right? And I've seen that also cause relationship issues because one of, you know, significant others either jealous, or they're just not on board with it, or, you know, hey, this isn't what I signed up for, or whatever. And, you know, I don't think it's fair to fault any one specific person, because yeah, there are instances where the one may be being unfair to the other and unfairly criticizing the other, or trying to actually bring them down intentionally. But it doesn't mean somebody's necessarily wrong. It just might mean that you're different. Now, that doesn't solve any relationship issues necessarily, but it is what it is sometimes. Now, pertaining to this question specifically, I don't think there is an easy way. I think the best way that you could maybe approach this is just to be like, look, you know, I've been training. This is a big part of my life. How I would like it to be part of your life as well. I would like us to live a healthy lifestyle together, be able to enjoy this together, be able to enjoy our health, both physically and psychologically together. Where this gets trickier, especially, is if you're married and this changes, or you're in a very long-term relationship. So if this is a newer relationship and you're already living this type of lifestyle, you just need to tell them right off the bat, right? It needs to be something that's known initially, right? Because then you can kind of weed things out. Now, if it's a longer term relationship where you've been with someone for multiple years or longer, or you're married or whatever, that's where it gets a little trickier, because you know, there's going to be habits that are set, and it's going to be a little bit harder to sort through that. And it's also a little bit harder to just say, hey, this isn't right for me, I'm going to move on. You can. It's a little more difficult. So I know the person asking this is not in that situation though. So in this case, just got to be honest right off the bat. You just need to be honest as early as possible. And if they can't at least be on board with it and somewhat in tune with it, move on. It's not worth it. I mean, it's your whole entire life, and it's something you're going to do your whole life. It's just not worth it's not worth struggling back and forth about. Now, if you're okay with it, I do know people that one person competes or lives this lifestyle and the other one doesn't. And if that works, that's fine. That's totally their thing. But it just doesn't in a lot of cases, right? So, yeah, I kind of beat around the bush a little bit there, but I think that gives a little bit more insight. I'd have to maybe know a little bit more about the situation specifically to give some good advice, but that is a tough one. All right, so let's see. These questions are all condensed. Let me open this up more. Seems like you have a very good understanding of neuroendocrine responses to training and dieting. I'm wondering about overtraining specifically. How I've had consistent declines in performance for 6 months now, after about 6 months of 6 days a week split with about 20 sets of body part a week on top of a 60-hour work week. That's your problem, most likely. I know I need to reduce my volume and overall stress, and am. Yes, definitely. But what got me here in the first place was just having no qualitative objective measures indicating I was overworking myself, aside from hypertension, and just doing whatever it takes, as the late Piano Man would say. Great reference. My training didn't start to suffer for a while after the hypertension, actually, so I don't think performance is always necessarily the only or best indication of overtaxing the body. My energy has been so low. I'm debating on getting blood work done. I'm curious what biomarkers you want to look for specifically, and anything else you'd want to look out for to prevent it's happening again. There's some really good points in this question, because the training part may not initially decline. So saying like, oh, my training's declining as a way to indicate overreaching isn't always good, because you can kind of mentally will yourself through it to some extent before it actually starts going down. At least a lot of people can, if they have that whatever it takes type of mentality. I mean, I know I can. I can completely overtrain myself into the ground until I can literally am debilitated before my training will actually start going down. And that's just a psychological thing, right? But you are just thrashing your CNS in the meantime. So markers, they mentioned lab work. I actually, if you get on my YouTube, which if you're watching this, you're watching my YouTube. So there you go. Just look for the video called Spotting Stress on Lab Work, and I talk about different markers that you can look for actually spotting a systemically stressed body if you're getting lab work done, right? And it's not just cortisol. There's a bunch of other stuff on there that I mentioned, immune markers and inflammatory markers, and even some electrolyte markers, and some just different things in there that might show stress. Now, there is more advanced testing that would show it a little bit better, doing something like the Dutch test, where you're seeing a lot more like urinary metabolites and more in-depth adrenal type of information. It's not always an option for everyone financially, but it's hard to be objective, and it's definitely a skill that you have to learn, and sometimes you have to mess up to learn it. Hypertension, yeah, blood pressure went up because of that. You might have seen some differences in blood sugar there. If you're checking blood sugar, you may have seen some increase in that. Other little things you can look at too are like heart rate variability. You can use some kind of tracker like a Whoop strap, I think it's a strap, or Whoop band, I should say, or Oura ring, which is what I have. Resting heart rate, those things can be like actual numbers that you can look at if you want some kind of data. Okay, gives you something. And then to actually have, and then the rest of it's just going to go by feel and learning. And if your training has been, say, decline in performance for 6 months now, I mean, if you have a decline in performance for a week, okay, you might be able to look at, you might be able to look at environmental factors like work or relationship or sleep or something and see like a hole, right? See some kind of hole in the formula there that might have caused it. All right, cool. We'll try again next week. We'll see how it goes. See if it goes better. Fix said problem, right? Now, if it doesn't work, then yeah, I mean, if you're having multiple weeks even of bad performance, then that's it. It's that simple. It's not, you shouldn't be having that, especially if you are outside of like long periods in deficits, right? Or very low body fat, right? Or extreme stress, right? I mean, that should not be happening. I can tell you right now, like in my growth phase, if I have a day, maybe 2 days that feel a little off, I don't think much of it. I might just take an extra day off, right? I'll just take an extra day off that week. That's usually enough. But if they're racking up multiple days in a row, that's it. We're deloading. We're just gonna take days off. We're just gonna get out of the gym, because all you're doing is digging that hole bigger and bigger and bigger. Your recovery resources are down and down and down. Your recovery, you're basically going into more debt at this point, and you have to repay that debt with time or recovery of some type. So the worse that debt gets, the harder it's going to be to recover from. So yes, there are numbers, there are things that you can look at and see and touch and feel and all that stuff. So go over and look at the video on my YouTube, since you're already on my YouTube, about spotting stress on lab work. That's a good one. Also, just kind of take into consideration what I just said about performance. But I can tell you right off the bat, I mean, not a lot of people are going to be training 6 days a week with 20 sets of body part with any type of like good intensity and working 60-hour work weeks. I mean, I'm trying to think, like I have clients that train at all different volumes and different frequencies and have different jobs and different amounts of stress. But I can't think of a lot of them that would thrive on that. Could they do it short term? Sure. And then we'd have to deload and we'd have to restart, or we'd have to build back up, like doing volume blocks where we're intentionally overreaching and building volume. But doing that consistently for a long period of time, that is a whole different story, and just not many people are going to be able to do that to with a higher amount of intensity and also a high total allostatic load, because you have all this other stuff like work 60 hours a week. So yeah, I hope that helps. There's several things in that response there, so it should give you some more insight, but definitely going to need to back it down. I would personally just start by getting the hell out of the gym and just taking days off. Just take a week off right off the bat. Don't even think about it. Take a week off. See how you feel. Just get the ball rolling like that, rather than try to string it along and just band-aid it. All right. I used super sups once upon a time, and still to this day, my gyno flares up after trying quite a few things. After trying quite a few things, the only thing that shuts it down is letrozole, but I know it isn't great for you. Can I control it some other way? Wait, goddamn, this is all. Let this thing keep closing. What would you recommend? Well, one of the problems here is, once you and I asked them too if they'd had lab work, and they said, yeah, test was way below range. And then I asked about estradiol, but they did not respond. So I do not know. Couple things. Once that tissue's there, the gland's going to be sensitive to, it's going to be pretty easy for it to flare up. It happened, like, you're not the only one that this happened to. And also skewed ratios of androgens to estrogens can potentially cause this to be worse. Hence why I asked about the estradiol. So, for example, is this person's estradiol elevated for some reason and they have very low androgens? That ratio is very skewed, right? Also, what's their like entirety of their estrogen profile like, metabolism of estrogen. Do they have other things going on, like maybe their liver isn't metabolizing things very well? I mean, there's a multitude of reasons that it could potentially be happening. Also, like exposure to xenoestrogens. You can go online and look up a list of different xenoestrogens that can potentially kind of act like estrogen in the body and cause this to happen. So that might be a good idea to do that and try to eliminate those, see how you feel. That might lower the load a little bit. You can also, I'd also get more thorough lab work done, actually make sure, look at your estradiol, see what the ratio is. Funny enough, you might even feel better and get less of a side effect with raising your testosterone and having a better testosterone to estrogen ratio. Okay. You can try using a higher dose of calcium D-glucarate to help with estrogen metabolism. I would get on. There's a bunch of brands. I mean, you can find it everywhere, but it's going to be pretty high dose, like multiple grams, 5 grams or so. Try that for a few weeks, see if it helps at all. You can use SERMs, but I mean, there are negatives to that, and it's not something that you'd want to take long term anyhow. So other option would be getting it cut out. But if you fix your hormones and your liver is functioning well and you don't have a lot of exposure to these xenoestrogens and you have a good ratio of test to estrogen, you shouldn't really be having this issue. But my assumption is that ratio is probably not very good. But this person, if you want to contact me specifically and do a consult, we can look at things in more depth, but kind of on the surface, that's what I can say. All right, what are some foods you like to use in a dieting phase that are voluminous and tasty while being low calorie, i.e. sugar-free Jello? Sugar-free Jello is fantastic. I've eaten a lot of that, more than I care to admit. All right. Depends on what kind of macros you're looking for, like which macronutrient, but you can, like, there are foods outside of things that have are just heavily artificially flavored. There are foods that you can flavor differently, like egg whites, very voluminous protein source. That's pretty much protein, little to no carbs and fat. Okay, you can flavor them sweet, spicy, savory, however you like. Mixes with different things, make different recipes, whatever. Lots of things you can do with those. Vegetable wise, tons of different vegetables. You can do like the cauliflower rice or even zucchini. Those things they don't have a lot of flavor. You can flavor them different ways. You can do different things with them, easy. And those are more so like actual whole food sources that are, going to be a little more nutritious, I guess. Now, I'm assuming you're probably not asking about fat. Probably not doing a ton of fat with low calories, so I'll just leave that one out. Almond butter is tasty, but I'm sure you're not going to be eating tons of that. But if you're just looking for literally filler foods, yeah, sugar-free Jello works. You can do stuff like Miracle Noodles has the konjac, I believe that's how you say it, fiber, which is basically just a soluble fiber. The Miracle Noodles, that brand, or there's some other brands too, they have different types of that pasta and rice and different things like that. Smart, I'm trying to think of the name. I think it's like Smart Cakes. Done those before. They have a bunch of different like cakes and muffins and all kinds of stuff. Linda's Low Carb, I think, or Linda's Delight, I think is the one. They have some stuff on there. Just you got to be careful because some of the stuff is going to be pretty shitty ingredient profile or be like loaded with soluble fiber or something that's just going to wreck your gut. But those are some things that you could potentially use. And there are a bunch. I should write a book about low calorie, voluminous foods. Lots of experience there from preps. But let's go on. Get a couple more. Let's see. Any tips for transitioning from higher volume to lower volume approach? Always struggle to drop. The more is more mindset. Oh, okay. Enjoy being in the gym and can really break myself. I feel like I can recover, although sleep and digestion are less immediately noticeable to suffer. I also struggle with getting lean and convince myself that more reps and sets good for additional calorie burn and free up more calories to consume. Well, you're not wrong. I mean, you do more, you're going to burn more calories, but that doesn't necessarily translate to needing to eat more, because if you cause more systemic stress, you may have just more adaptation, right? So, or more negative metabolic adaptation. So doing more doesn't necessarily translate to eating more all the time. It does on paper, but it doesn't always hormonally in the long run, right? So, yeah, I mean, if it's just a mental thing, I would also ask why exactly you want to do that. If you think that you're not progressing in the gym, or you've just been stuck on just doing more and more in the gym and not actually making any progress, that's a valid reason. I think that could be a valid reason to switch to more of a tension-based block where you're just training to get stronger, and you're probably going to progress that way. But figure out why you want to do it first. If you have a reason, it's always easier to do something if you have a good reason, right? And then beyond that, there's plenty of proof, right? There's plenty of proof of people doing it and doing fine with it. And also, you got to think too that people worry about, oh, I'm gonna have to eat a little bit less because my caloric expenditure is less. I'm gonna be very hungry, which actually really isn't the case, because your hunger is going to kind of adapt to how much of a deficit you're in, or how much of a surplus. We'll just say deficit here, I guess, because you're mentioning getting lean. So for example, if you're doing a higher volume program and you're eating 2,500 calories and you're in a 200 calorie deficit, I'm just throwing out random numbers, you're going to have X amount of hunger. If you do a little bit lower volume and you're eating 2,300 calories and you're in X deficits, that's the same as the other deficit. Now, your hunger is probably about the same, because your hunger is also responding. Your hunger levels and your leptin levels and all this are responding to that gap, that deficit gap. That's part of what they're responding to, not simply just the sheer amount of food. It's energy balance. If you watched my video on ghrelin that I did on my other whiteboard chat here on my YouTube, I mentioned that. I talked about how it's really energy homeostasis is the whole goal of these hunger hormones and signaling, right? So it doesn't, just because you're eating, if you have less expenditure and less food, you may still have the same hunger as you do with more expenditure and more food. You might even have less hunger. You might even feel better because your total allostatic load is lower doing less. Potentially, right? Depends on how intense you're training. But yeah, I used to be under that mindset too, and all I did was just mess myself up over and over again. I had a hard time making any type of strength progress in the gym. As soon as I started doing less, I got stronger and got better. Simple as that. Like it literally is that simple. But you don't have to. And if you're nervous about it, don't just start like training DC training or something, doing 3 days a week. Just drop down to maybe 4 days a week and drop your volume down some. Focus on getting stronger. Have some movements and some top sets in there, and some places where you can get stronger, and focus on it. And once you start seeing that manifest into something positive, it's going to be easier to do. Okay. There you go. You can do it. I have faith. So let's move on. Couple more, I think maybe one or two more. Okay, so we know it's optimal to usually go into a growth phase, bulking after dieting down. Could you break down the reasons for such? I have a pretty good understanding on it. I know insulin sensitivity plays a huge part, but I would like to hear your take on it. Well, yeah, I mean, it's insulin sensitivity, but it's also just a better starting point. I mean, you got to assume that you're going to gain some fat when you're in a surplus. It's going to happen. You're not going to partition every single morsel of nutrient into muscle tissue and gain lean body mass. You're going to store in adipose. It's going to happen. So you have a leaner starting point. So if I start at 10% body fat, again, just numbers. 10% body fat and 200 pounds of lean body mass, or I start at 15% body fat and 202 pounds of lean body mass. I have a little bit more because I have a little more water and glycogen, right? I'm pretty much the same size muscular wise in both cases. But the thing is, I have more body fat in one. I'm going to get fatter quicker because I didn't start as lean, meaning my growth phase is going to be shorter potentially. So if my growth phase is shorter, my potential for growth is shorter. That's it. You got to think, like, the longer you can stretch out a growth phase and continue to progress steadily and hold higher body weights in this, you're probably going to get a better result most of the time. So if you can start a little bit leaner and maintain a decent body composition and have a longer time in a surplus, you're often going to get better results in the long run. And that's really the main reason. It's not just the insulin sensitivity. That is certainly part of it, but it's also just a better starting point, because if you're fat and you get fatter, you're just getting fatter. You're not getting more muscular, right? So, because you're going to gain fat, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of how much room you have to gain fat and continue to, because oftentimes that's what ends a growth phase is. You're just getting too fat. You're getting too fat. You're gaining fat faster than you're gaining muscle. Your partitioning's crap. Your blood sugar goes up, yada, yada, yada. You have to stop. You have to reset because you're just going to get fat and sloppy. You're not gaining any more muscle. So this just allows you to have a bigger window and more growth potential. That's it. It's that simple, really. If you really want to simplify it, that's essentially what we're looking at. Okay, last one. When doing 12 IUs of GH, it's a lot, daily, how would you split the dosage? How to split the dosage, and does it need to be fasted? So I don't know what this person's goal is. If they're doing 12 IUs, 12 units for fat loss, that's probably pretty much pointless. You know, we know that maybe two or three at most needed for free fatty acid mobilization in a fasted state. It's going to take a few hours. No way you could do 12, really, unless you just didn't eat all day long, because you'd just be overlapping with meals. So that would be pretty much pointless. For hypertrophy, assuming there's the correct other compounds are coupled with it to assist, because on its own it's not really going to help. Get that out of the way. Doesn't really matter if you fasted. No, don't have to be in a baseline insulin state. Still, for the IGF release, maximal IGF release, we're still looking at right around maybe 2 or 3 IUs at a time. So yeah, 2 or 3 units, take your total, take 2 or 3 units at a time, split it up, intramuscular, throughout the day. There you go. With 12, I mean, with that much, you could do 3 times 4 essentially, and just, it's not really going to matter because you're going to have it in your system all day anyhow. Just doing the intramuscular. You could do bilateral if you wanted and split up like 1.5 each side or whatever, but I mean, at that dose, just split it evenly. It's not going to make any difference. It's so much. So yeah, but yeah, intramuscular, 2 to 3 at a time, split it up. Doesn't need to be fasted, more or less. Watch your blood sugar and so all right, that was a long one today, but thanks for tuning in, and I will talk to you guys next time.